Well, are you excited about your new book and all that surrounds it and the attention that's coming? And
Yeah, I am. At first, I was just real sad because it came out with me in the hospital, and so there was nothing done about it at all. No promotion, no press, and but wow, I mean, the publisher, bless her heart. I mean, she's got loads of experience publishing. She's published lots of stuff over the years, but this is a brand new press. And I'm part of her first series of authors. And she treated me like a queen. I mean, just really, really nice. And so then she published it, and then she made special accommodations that cost money for my book to accommodate the art, to make a bigger font because I couldn't read it. Different things that, cost her money. And then I was gone. And so I was like, oh man, she's going to lose money on this for sure. And so that made me feel kind of bad. She was able to get some book reviews while I was in the hospital, which was real nice. And the book reviews have been crazy good, just really nice. My most recent one was by Zaneth Carasa for La Bloga. And she's taught, I think, at the University of Kansas for 15 or 20 years, but she's Mexican, and she wrote it in Spanish, and she's won all kinds of prizes in Spain and Italy and China and in South America. And La Bloga is the oldest Latino website on the internet. You can kind of guess that by the name, La Bloga. Blogs were so novel at the time that it didn't cross their mind that La Bloga would not be was a very generic term for a blog. But it's been around now for a very long time, and some impressive writers have written for it. I think they published one or two of my book reviews, even though it's Latino. And so I wrote her, I'm telling people about my sickness kind of as I run across their name. I'll send them a little note. So I don't know if you know, but I'm in hospice, and I just thought I should tell you, since we know each other, tell you personally, and hope all's good. Bye. Something short like that. And I sent her something like that, I think on Twitter. But with her, I also wrote, I feel so bad, and I'm so ashamed I never reviewed that book for you. Because a few years back, when I first started getting super, super sick, and nobody could figure out what it was, I promised like 5 people I would review their books. And one of them was her, one of them was Silva Lara, Gris Munoz, Carlos Flores, and then a guy from India, Kushal Potter. And I promised them all I'd write reviews of their books, and then I never did. And I felt ashamed and guilty about it ever since. And so in this note to her, I apologized for it. And she didn't even acknowledge that when she wrote me back. What she did say instead was, well, I noticed you have a new book out. If you'll send me a PDF, I'll write you a review and get it in La Bloga by next week. So I told my publisher, and she sent it. And sure enough, Zaneth published a Spanish language review of my book, which, as far as I can tell, is a positive review. I haven't seen any negative reviews yet. I guess people don't bother to write them or don't send them to me, but I've been fortunate in getting a lot of really generous reviews. So anyway, I was in the nursing home, and I was miserable and in pain, and and didn't really know what to think of the future. And it was like 11:30 at night, and I just organized I organized a book release party, in about 30 minutes. And well, I organized most of it that night, and then the next day, the rest of it, and about another 30 minutes. And it's got a jazz band with David Romo and Carlos Fidel Espinosa, who are great musicians and have performed behind me in many, many readings. And it always, knock on wood, comes out well. People think we've practiced, when we haven't. They're just really good. And then a poet from LA who goes by the name Sandy Shakes the Mic is coming out. She's going to read a poem of mine, and then I'm going to read, God willing, gosh, if I didn't think I was going to make it today, I just feel so bad. But so that's the 17th, and I'm pretty excited about that. People say they're going to come, and I know you're going to.
Isn't your publisher coming out too?
Yeah, she's coming. Yeah, she's been so supportive, just really, really supportive. And that's good, because now I don't have to figure out somebody to do the book sales, because I can't deal with that. And so she'll be here to take care of that if people buy books. And different people are telling me they're going to come from Juarez and other places. And hopefully a few people show up, and hopefully I give a decent reading. I laugh when I talk about it, because you've been to my readings, I think. I usually wear like knee length black leather boots and a black biker jacket, and I'm all like punk rock, and screaming and yelling and rowdy to the max. And well, I don't think I'll be doing that this time. I'm going to be a little bit more subdued. I'm pretty sure. And certainly my clothes are going to be more subdued. I don't really fit into my black biker jacket anymore, or my black leather knee boots. And it's hot as hell, it's 102 degrees. Yeah. So I'm not going to be wearing those. So it's going to be a little bit different reading for me than some where I'm like stomping the stage and, ululating and stuff. But I'm hoping that I can keep people's attention. I pulled together, I told you, like I went through the new book, and as well as the 3 older books, and pulled together like 5 sets that might work for you, for me to choose whatever one I want to read, depending on the energy of the exchange. So when I did that, the trouble I had is that, whoops, let me turn off my ringer. A whole lot of my oeuvre is about sex, right? Sex and love poems, and I'm in no mood to read about sex and love poems. I just don't feel that way anymore, and I certainly don't want to read sex and love poems about anybody who might still be alive. And if they were dead, that'd be different, but not about my ex, for sure. And so it was kind of different going through my books and specifically rejecting all of the sex and love poems. It's like, well, that leaves about 3 poems in that book, So it won't be about that. You'll see when I read.
Do you have a copy handy you can show us the cover? Because it's a beautiful cover. Yeah. The artist?
Mr. Tessa Somak from Southern Cal, around LA. Can you see it? Do I have it right?
Yeah.
And The only thing that irritated me about Zaneth Carasa's review is that she said I wrote my poems in response to the art. And it's really the other way around. He created the art directly in response to my poetry.
Wow.
Yeah, which is a huge compliment and just pleased me no end, of course. And the publisher just loved the art. I wasn't sure anybody else would. It's kind of, some of it's kind of dark, and there seemed to be a lot of exposed memories in it. But it's very dramatic, and he wrote it directly in response to my poetry. So what's not to love about that, right?
Yeah. Do you want to read one of your sets you've carved out?
Sure. Oh, shoot. Well, what I prepared for my first set was 3 or 4 poems that kind of explain where I'm coming from, where I come from, because not everybody knows that I'm from just like this little bitty rural hamlet in the Texas Panhandle. That, the guy who owned the cotton gin owned all the houses and the one-room gas station, grocery store, and post office. I mean, straight out of Flannery O'Connor. And there was US 83 in front of my house, and on the other 3 sides, cotton fields owned by somebody. And it was just like really, really a rural situation, a stucco house with a pitched tin roof. And people in the, in the spring and summer, we would wake up and find fruits and vegetables on our front porch because my mother was a beauty, I'm pretty sure is the reason. And then my father was kind of like a war hero and very handsome and very amiable, even though he was a Yankee. So at first they were like damn Yankee, what do you mean? Mary Lee, why'd you marry a damn Yankee? In fact, one of her brothers had said that he was still in the war. He goes, I'm going to come back and kill that damn Yankee son of a bitch. But they wound up getting to be close friends. So this poem, actually, you published this poem for me in Gas, in your online
Journal.
journal. And it's called Twitty Baroque. And the interesting thing about it to me is that, well, I wrote it in Tumblewords, which I write all my stuff in Tumblewords workshops. And this one was presented by a classical cellist, and she played Bach, and she told us about the format of a Bach suite, and told us a little bit about Baroque art and whatnot. And I wrote this while she was playing one of the Bach suites, and I call it Twitty Baroque. The world beyond the stucco house is a highway, trucks roaring by like early summer tornadoes, the sound of commerce passing through. Mama's fear and anger echoes in the silence of the fields that surround us on all sides, cotton fields my daddy didn't know. Books on the shelf next to the front door, a gift of charity. Their pictures magnetize my eyes and fingers. Giotto's golden halos, Rubens' corpulent god of drink forbidden by Southern Baptists. Dionisio lavish and flagrant in his lusts. Robes rich as the wine of Caravaggio's world. Excess, dissolution, unthinkable to church folk gathered to sing a few miles away. The giver of those books escapes my memory, but the incandescent flesh and vivid colors vibrate still through time. My fingers trace stained glass, Baroque cathedrals, magnificent spires high above arts communion, so unlike Baptist austerity and fear of beauty. Oh, Greco's lush colors seduce me, an agony of faces. Strange and lavish glory, adulation too close to idolatry to be found in a country church, an austere gathering of convicted souls. Nude walls devoid of icons, yet filled with the hubris of certitude. There were also gifts of heavy records handed down to this family, its genial war hero father, a beautiful and brilliant young mother, 3 daughters, so pretty and bookish. Mama played the music for me while we were home alone, Daddy at work, the big girls at school, a hand-me-down hi-fi, the relentless ecstasy of Ravel, the subliminal messages of Rigoletto, Puccini, and Tchaikovsky. Thrilling trills shiver the tin roof of a stucco house owned by the boss down at the Cotton Gin, who owned everything there in the 20 flats, even the one-room store and post office. Outside, trucks shift gears, maximize profit by minimizing transport time. Cotton bowls dance triplets in dirt-blown fields. Dust storms steal my air, leave me breathless as the beauty of imperfect pearls, a beauty that instilled within me an inchoate reverence for sin.
Wow.
Yeah, and I still have that book. I just found it the other day when we were doing some cleaning and rearranging, and it was called The Life of Christ in Art. And it's so old that they couldn't even make color photographs in the book. They had color on pieces of paper that they then glued onto a page in the book. So it's really old. Then I had, oh gosh, a little one called Suddenly Aware of the Dark, set at my grandma's house. We didn't have a TV, but grandma did. And she lived about 25 miles away. So we went over there a lot, you know. We were the closest of the family. Blank dark fades my consciousness to empty shadow. I feel caught in the antics of the Hollywood Squares, a game show I saw when I was small on grandma's TV. Black and white and snowy from the Western Auto Store. A crown of artificial flowers, dusty in a green glass swan, nesting on a white doily hand-tatted by someone dead. B-list actors playing the fool. Miraculous as resurrection to us. No TV in my parents' house back in the 20 flats. No cable service out there. No money for an antenna. And anyhow, Mama was afraid of the storm gods. So visits to grandma featured 3 channels of magic: orchestras, cowboys, and Disney's Wonderful World. In the kitchen, a white formica table below a wall of gifts, a piece of cedar from the Ozarks with the Last Supper, the pretty Jesus with compassionate eyes framed in brass. Grandpa sat weeping into coffee he had saucered to cool the night Grandma died. The only time I saw him cry. Eyes closed, I hid behind Daddy, suddenly aware of the dark.
Well, we had similar upbringings and we're about the same age. I remember those things.
Yeah.
3 TV channels. I even remember 2 at one time.
Right? And so here's a little one, very short one. And it like prefigures how I got the hell out of 20 at some point. And in the Texas Panhandle, and I'm sure elsewhere around there, they have storms they call blue northers, and they just blow in and level everything, and they're windy and it's cold, 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 cold. very cold wind. It's called a blue norther. In the North Texas Panhandle, southbound truckers blast down Highway 83, headed to where the wind's not from the north and not called blue. Winds and storm outside become Valkyries, the concrete septic tank a magic stone. Women warriors ride like furies across the frozen plain. An Irish woman outruns a chariot, gives birth to twins, lays a curse. The wind takes my spirit in its arms and flees. Mama lights the candle, locks the door. And then one last one about that area and me growing up there. Three of the parts of this book, which has 5 parts, I believe, are begun with a section from a longer poem that was published as one poem called Creation Myth. And this is the first section called Woman Smiles. Woman smiles, her face starred, exotic birds tattooed around her mouth, beneath her eyes, around her nose, her delicate teeth exposed to heaven, confident no one will scorn. Woman smiles at Okie brothers, Indian lovers, as grandma squat over iron pots of lard and lye. Good black river bottom, green with growth, the kind that feeds and chokes, the kind that covers graves. Candles flicker, drums beyond the wall, fiddles call, jumping boys who prance and chant, scaring away the spirits. Rain on a tin roof, honeysuckle raising cane on the side porch, dogs under the floorboards, warm and waiting. Woman smiles, a wedding vase, a water bird, a box of roots, a rocking horse, a basket facing east. Out of the earth, a mist floats, fondles the turtle and the deer. Stars on her face, woman smiles. Beads on her head, woman smiles. Bird at her chin, woman smiles. Stone in her pocket, woman smiles. Rainbows behind her, woman smiles. Behind the mask, we find woman. And once truly found, woman smiles.
Nice.
Thanks. So that was one of the sets I set up, and I thought it kind of set a context for who I am and where I come from, and how sort of unpredictably visual art had a big impact on me as a child that spun itself out through the rest of my life. Whenever I traveled, I was always at the museums, and here in El Paso, it's filled with art and artists, as you know, and so that only continued my interest in art, although it certainly didn't end my interest in the great classics and, world masterpieces. But we have some really amazing artists in this town. And I married one of them and lived with one of them for 9 years. And so my house is filled with art. And so that really early exposure to images by the greats, Giotto, El Greco, Caravaggio, who's always haunted me. It's lingered on and continued. I once did a reading at the El Paso Art Museum when it was brand new, and I guess they were trying to get people down there. They had a series of readings called Museo Literati, and everybody else that read was like from the university, the academy, the art, the writers who taught and had, of course, publications. And I was the only what I call a street poet, because I started writing poetry really in the Chicano studies. I mean, not the Chicano studies, excuse me, the Chicano movement, el movimiento literario de Chicano. My earliest influences were Chicano writers like Ana Castillo, Denise Chavez, Ricardo Sanchez, even though I never met him, I knew his wife, and Lalo Delgado, who was just a rascal, and other Chicano writers like that, many in Santa Fe and in Albuquerque. In Albuquerque, Ana Castillo taught there for a while at UNM, University of New Mexico, and she had this fine adobe house near Old Town, and she started a workshop called the Sunday No Mass Workshop, and I was the token güera. Everybody else was raza, either Mexican American or Mexican, and so that was a big influence on me. And so one of the things about that kind of writing is that it's very much a part of politics and political movements and civil rights movements and political like strikes and events like that. So if you had people gathered together to demonstrate against, for example, the putting babies in cages, you would have poetry. And so I started writing poetry, sort of. I had begun writing in Santa Fe, but I was writing prose. I was writing kind of fiction, kind of autobiography, and they all liked it. And a poet told me that, now I was too old to become a poet. If you're not a poet by the time you're 15, you can't be a poet, and you're already 30, so you can't write poetry. But I moved to Las Cruces down in southern New Mexico, and nobody knew that rule, I guess. And there was a weekly a weekly open mic that I went to. And for open mics, poetry is just so much better because it tends to be shorter than fiction. And so I started writing more poetry, but all along I kept it on my computer under the folder poetry like substance. The way that back then on frozen pizzas, they had in the ingredient list cheese like substance.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
I wasn't brave enough yet to call my work poetry, but it was poetry like substance, and I started writing more and more of it. I still wrote the stories and got a few of them published. I had 3 published in Puerto del Sol and Sellouts magazine, which was a great little magazine edited by Steve Brown. And so I still had my stories published and featured, so to speak, with me, but I was writing poetry, and it just started accumulating. And then I started Tumblewords right before I moved from Las Cruces to El Paso. And in Las Cruces, of course, I worked at Centro Legal Campesino, the farm worker legal aid. And so my life was just suffused with politics. I remember a phone call shortly after I moved there, a phone call from my father, otherwise known as Daddy. And Daddy said, well, baby, let me get this straight. You sue farmers? Because of course all his friends were farmers and ranchers. And I said, well, sometimes, Daddy, sometimes they don't treat their workers right. So um, anyhow, before I moved, well, Denise Chavez had started something called the Border Book Festival, and she had me do a thing that was kind of like a combination speakers forum, improvisational performance, and writing, whatever. And a woman I had known in Santa Fe who worked for the New Mexico Arts Division, and then her boss were in the audience. And then they took me out for lunch, and they said, well, if you wanted to do something, down here, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd start a writing group like the ones. Judith Hill is the woman that I knew. And I said, like the ones Judith and I were in northern New Mexico. There was this group of women loosely associated around Natalie Goldberg, who went on to be very famous, New York Times bestseller and all that, for her book Writing Down the Bone. And her colleagues were Joan Logie, Miriam Sagan, Judith Hill, maybe somebody else, but those were the main ones. And so I would take these writing groups, be part of these writing groups that they had. They'd charge like $80 for 10 weeks, and you'd go and you'd write and read aloud. And thus the format for Tumblewords was born. And they asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I would start something like that and do it in Mesilla Valley, where, not that many writers and poets lived. And sure enough, the Concilio Campesino, which was a senior citizen center for farm workers, they said I could use it for free on Thursday nights. And so I started, and from the get-go, I had great presenters. Denise Chavez, I think Debbie Nathan came over and presented, and other people like that. Wilibaldo Delgadillo, who had won the Premio Chihuahua for his first novel that year, and other great writers presented, a few visual artists, and then right away, like within a month of me starting it, I moved to El Paso. Michael Wyatt had gotten me a job doing disability advocacy, and so I moved to El Paso, and I continued doing those Thursday night workshops for maybe 4 years or so. But also right away, I started doing Saturday afternoon workshops in El Paso. So I was doing 2 workshops a week for maybe 4 years. And then at some point I decided I'd quit the New Mexico series and just focus on El Paso. And this month, it's 27 years I've been presenting free creative writing workshops to the community. And by community, that term is very loosely used because it spans the entire United States and Canada now, since we do it via Zoom. We always had very illustrious presenters, from Jamaica or Chile or Hungary or wherever, but the participants, by definition, were here, in Juarez, Las Cruces, El Paso. But now we do it on Zoom, and we have participants from across the country, across the US and across Canada, and even from time to time from elsewhere, like Bangladesh or the Italian Alps. And what's cool is that those people that aren't from here are even more enamored of it than the local people who've been doing it for decades. And so that's pretty cool. I finally told a couple of my volunteers, I've had volunteers and they would do things like guest host or whatever, but they're like, nah, I can't do programming, Donna, that's your thing. And you're the one that knows writers everywhere in the world. But finally, I told these 2 volunteers some weeks ago, well, you know, it's time to get the September schedule out, and I haven't made it. And I think it's time for us to acknowledge that I'm not gonna be making the workshops for Tumblewords anymore. And that met with kind of like a shocked silence. Because a lot of people, even once I tell them I'm in a hospice, they don't get that that means that I'm dying, you know? So, but then in a week, maybe even not very long at all, Kit Wren, who's in his 30s, and before he went away to college, he came to Tumblewords from the time he was 11. Then he went away to university. And once he came back to town, he started up with Tumblewords, and he's very involved in the spoken word scene of El Paso, which is hugely vital. And so he's getting it done, you know, he's scheduling the workshops. And yeah, I mean, when I do my yearly workshop on writing for the dark time, it's true. I get people to write poems for me in India and, you know, all over the place. And maybe he doesn't have those friends and connections all over the world. Scotland as well, and, you know, just France. And all these years of me writing and posting my poetry online and doing Tumblewords, people know me, you know, pretty much in every continent but Antarctica and China, but everywhere else, they're somewhat familiar with Tumblewords and somewhat familiar with my poetry. And that made everything so much easier when it came to organizing things. But he's going to get it together, and they'll get it together. And I'm sure Tumblewords will go on to celebrate its 30th anniversary in a few years and be very high quality. And it's a lot of fun. And you know, things that have been written in Tumblewords that in that fashion have been published in the Paris Review, and pretty much everything I've had published in the last 20 some odd years, not everything, but almost everything was originally written at Tumblewords. And that's true for other writers as well who've been coming consistently over the years. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of amazing that it does, because it is kind of a different format of, you know, we don't give critique, we don't give feedback. The presenter says something, you know, maybe reads a poem or shows the slide or whatever, and then we write maybe 10 minutes or so, and then we stop, and then everybody reads aloud. We go around the circle. If it's a physical group, we go around the boxes like Hollywood Square. If it's a Zoom group, and everybody reads, and we don't give feedback, and we don't do caveats or explanations. You know, the only caveat you're allowed to say, if you just feel compelled to say something before you read it, is, well, this is shit, and then go on and read. And it is surprising how much good stuff happens. Sometimes at the end of the workshops, everyone's just like stunned by everything they've just heard. So that's pretty cool. Nowadays, if I recently had a poem published that I must have written like 23 years ago at Tumblewords, and I don't know, I never submitted it anywhere. And I submitted it to C2 magazine, a bilingual Hindi and English magazine out of Pittsburgh, and they published it. And, you know, I was a little nervous to see it in print, worried that it would seem stale or, you know, awkward or something, but it worked out. And so I guess you never can say never on your work. But what I was going to say is that oftentimes if someone reads an older poem of mine, and they ask me, well, what was your inspiration or what were you thinking about? And I'm like, I don't know. But it's not even just older stuff. Sometimes it could be 3 weeks ago, and I don't even remember writing the poem exactly because I like write it in a fugue. I just write it. Well, I could read, I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff on here. I've got 5 sets, but I could read the piece that gives rise to the title. The title of the book is As Meaningful as Any Other. And it comes from a short prose poetry piece. These days, sometimes I think the distinctions between poetry and prose are almost artificial. And even if you look back through time, some people they were writing without line breaks and all, but their work was just so poetic. And this is called Blank Check. And it starts out with a quote to make me seem scholarly, I guess. A quote from A Scatological Laundry List by Sheldon Kopp. It is a random universe to which we bring meaning. We live in a random universe to which we supply the meaning. So just do it. Interpret the signs that surround you. Use the titles of records in the antique jukebox as a meaningful tool of augury. Throw in the name of the cafe in which you find yourself, a pocket full of quarters and time. Always start with Patsy Cline. If your jukebox has no Patsy in it, in and of itself, that deficiency is a sign with which you must reckon. Ignore the flatulence of the woman weeping at the next table, tears flooding her lonely face. Do not, however, ignore the tears on that lonely face. Ask the waitress for some blank guest checks off the pad she uses to take orders. Let the size of those blank checks dictate the length of your notes from the symbology the universe has assigned you for your interpretive pleasure. Don't forget that the name of what you are writing upon is blank check, for that fact also has meaning, as meaningful as any other. The sound of the music, the words contained in the song titles, the rhythm of the cafe door as it swings open and shut, the periodicity of the crying woman's flatus, the size and number of guest checks the waitress has shared with you. These are your only parameters. Let your thoughts fall like rain. Read the glyphs that appear upon the paper before you. An oracle writing itself. You supply the meaning.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Donna. And I planned on listening on Thursday.
Okay, Belinda, thank you.
And thank you very much. Get some good rest.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.